Today I want to go through a sutta, the Mahadukkha Kanda Sutta. It's the 13th sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya. Thus have I heard, on one occasion the Blessed One was living at Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's park. Savatthi was the capital of Kosala. The Buddha spent more time in that city than any other place. Many suttas are spoken there. That was where the Jetawana Grove, he's translated as Jeta's Grove, Jetawana monastery was established. That was sort of the main vihara during the Buddha's lifetime. Then when it was morning, a number of bhikkhus dressed and taking their bowls and outer robes went into Savatthi for alms. Then they thought, it is still too early to wander for alms in Savatthi. Suppose we went to the park of the wanderers of other sects. So they went to the park of the wanderers of other sects and exchanged greetings with the wanderers. When this courteous and amiable talk was finished, they sat down on one side, and the wanderers said to them. So this begins with the bhikkhus in conversation with the wanderers, the samanas of non-Buddhist groups. So it's always important when reading the suttas to pay attention to the context of who the Buddha is speaking to. So if he's speaking to, if it's involving the bhikkhus and wanderers of other sects, it's probably going to be on a more philosophical level. Friends, this is what the wanderer said. Friends, the recluse Gautama, that's the Buddha, the recluse Gautama, describes the full understanding of sensual pleasures, and we do so too. The recluse Gautama describes the full understanding of material form, and we do so too. The recluse Gautama describes the full understanding of feelings, and we do so too. What then is the distinction, friends? What is the variance, what is the difference between the recluse Gautama's teaching of the Dhamma and ours, between his instructions and ours? So they're saying, your teacher's not so different than us. Why he's so special? We talk about the same things, sensual pleasures, form, and feeling. Then those bhikkhus neither approved nor disapproved of the wanderer's words. Without doing either, they rose from their seats and went away, thinking, we shall come to understand the meaning of these words in the Blessed One's presence. So they take it back to the Buddha. When they had wandered for alms in Savatthi and had returned from their alms round, after the meal they went to the Blessed One, and after paying homage to him, they sat down on one side and told him what had taken place. The Blessed One said, Bhikkhus, wanderers of other sects who speak thus should be questioned thus. But friends, what is the gratification, what is the danger, what is the escape in the case of sensual pleasure? What is the gratification, what is the danger, what is the escape in the case of material form? What is the gratification, what is the danger, what is the escape in the case of feelings? Being questioned thus, wanderers of other sects will fail to account for the matter, and what is more, they will get into difficulties. Why is that? Because it is not their province. Bhikkhus, I see no one in the world with its gods, its maras, its brahmas, in this generation with its recluses and brahmins, with its princes and people, who could satisfy the mind with a reply to these questions, except for the Tathagata or his disciple, or one who has learned it from them. Sensual pleasures. And what, bhikkhus, is the gratification in the case of sensual pleasures? A gratification is asado in Pali. The translation Bhikkhu Bodhi is using here is maybe a bit formal. In the Pali English dictionary, it's given as enjoyment, satisfaction, or sweetness. What is the gratification in the case of sensual pleasures? Bhikkhus, there are these 5 chords, panchaguna, the 5 chords of sensual pleasure. What are the 5? Forms cognizable by the eye that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and likable, connected with sensual desire, and provocative of lust. Sounds cognizable by the ear that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and likable, connected with sensual desire and provocative of lust. Odors cognizable by the nose, etc. Flavors cognizable by the tongue, etc. Tangibles cognizable by the body that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and likable, connected with sensual desire and provocative of lust. These are the 5 chords of sensual pleasure. Now the pleasure and joy that arise dependent on these 5 chords of sensual pleasure are the gratification in the case of sensual pleasure. So objects of the sense organs, the gratification of them is that they produce pleasant feeling. Getting back to the basic ideas of the dependent origination, because of sense contact feeling. That's why we desire these various objects, pleasant tastes and sounds and touches and sights, because they produce sukha, pleasant feeling in the mind. The reason behind the sensual desire, and that is their gratification. That's their satisfaction, enjoyment, or sweetness. Then, actually, the longest section of the sutta here is when he gets into the dangers of sensual pleasure. And what, bhikkhu, is the danger of sensual pleasures? And he goes through various sufferings that beings endure on account of sensual pleasure. It begins with, here, bhikkhus, on account of the craft by which a clansman makes his living, whether checking or accounting or calculating or farming or trading or husbandry or archery or royal service or whatever craft it may be. He has to face cold, he has to face heat, he is injured by contact with gadflies, mosquitoes, wind, sun, creeping things. He risks death by hunger and thirst. Now this is the danger in the case of sensual pleasures, a mass of suffering visible here and now. Having sensual pleasures as its cause, sensual pleasures as its source, sensual pleasures as its basis, the cause being simply sensual pleasures. So first drawback to sensual desire is you've got to work hard to satisfy them. And this entails various kinds of physical suffering in effort to acquire the means of sensual pleasure. Then, as a result of this effort, the second one, if no property comes to the clansman when he works and strives and makes an effort, he sorrows, grieves, and laments. He weeps, beating his breast, and becomes distraught, crying, "My work is in vain, my effort is fruitless." Now this too is a danger in the case of sensual pleasures, the cause being simply sensual pleasures. And if property does come to the clansman while he works and strives and makes an effort, thus he experiences pain and grief in protecting it. How shall neither kings nor thieves make off with my property, nor fire burn it, nor water sweep it away, nor hateful airs make off with it? And as he guards and protects his property, kings or thieves make off with it, or fire burns it, or water sweeps it away, or hateful airs make off with it. And he sorrows, grieves, and laments. He weeps, beating his breast, and becomes distraught, crying, "What I had, I have no longer." And this too is a danger in the case of sensual pleasures, the cause being simply sensual pleasures. So on account of desiring wealth and goods, a person acquires property and wealth, and then a new set of troubles begin, that the effort to protect and make secure. Nowadays there's a lot of concern about security and keeping everything protected, even down to the annoyance of passwords to get into your various internet things. There's natural disasters like fire or water sweeping it away, or it can be taken by thieves or kings, right? Like taxes. Taxes in ancient times were quite high and arbitrary, so the king could just decide to, that guy's got too much money, I'm going to take a bunch of it. Or hateful heirs, where your greedy relatives will come and scoop it all up and make off with it. So even acquiring property is not the end of your troubles, but a set of new beginning of troubles. Then, again, with sensual pleasures as the cause, sensual pleasures as the source, sensual pleasure as the basis, the cause being simply sensual pleasure, kings quarrel with kings, nobles with nobles, Brahmins with Brahmins, householders with householders. Mother quarrels with child, child with mother, father with child, child with father. Brother quarrels with brother, brother with sister, sister with brother, friend with friend, and here in their quarrels, brawls, and disputes, they attack each other with fists, clods, sticks, or knives, whereby they incur death or deadly suffering. Now this too is a danger in the case of sensual pleasures, the cause being sensual pleasures. Again, with sensual pleasures as the cause, men take up swords and shields and buckle on bows and quivers, and they charge into battle, massed in double array, with arrows and spears flying and swords flashing. And there they are wounded by arrows and spears, and their heads are cut off by swords, whereby they incur death or deadly suffering. And this too is a danger in the case of sensual pleasures, the cause being sensual pleasures. Again, with sensual pleasures as the cause, men take swords and shields and buckle on bows and quivers, and they charge slippery bastions with arrows and spears flying and swords flashing. And there they are wounded by arrows and spears and splashed with boiling liquid and crushed under heavy weights, and their heads are cut off by swords, whereby they incur death or deadly suffering. Now this too is danger in the case of sensual pleasures, the cause being sensual pleasures. These couple of paragraphs are kind of interesting in that talking about the results of sensual desire, he brings up beginning with quarreling, proceeding to wars and battles. So it's essentially laying out an economic basis for warfare. That countries go to war, and I think this borne out by history. Countries go to war for territory and resources. And it's to satisfy sensual desires is the primary underlying motive for the aggrandizement. And as a result, there's a great deal of misery and suffering. Splashed with boiling oil, crushed with weights, chopped with swords and bows and arrows. Again, with sensual pleasure as the cause, men break into houses, plunder wealth, commit burglary, ambush highways, seduce other men's wives, and when they are caught, kings have many kinds of tortures inflicted upon them. The kings have them flogged with whips, beaten with canes, beaten with clubs. They have their hands cut off, their feet cut off, their hands and feet cut off, their ears cut off, their noses cut off, their ears and noses cut off. They have them subject to the porridge pot, to the polished shell shave, to Rahu's mouth, to the fiery wreath, to the flaming hand, to the blades of grass, to the bark dress, to the antelope, to the meat hooks, to the coins, to the lye pickling, to the pivoting pin, to the rolled up palliasse. And they have them splashed with boiling oil, and they have them thrown to be devoured by dogs, and they have them impaled alive on stakes, and they have their heads cut off with swords, whereby they incur death or deadly suffering. Now this too is a danger in the case of sensual pleasures, the cause being simply sensual pleasures. So these ancient Indian kings were not soft on crime. These all these various tortures that have these names, they're all described in the commentaries. There's Rahu's mouth is they pry your mouth open with a stick and put a oil lamp inside your mouth. The blades of grass, they flay off big hunks of your flesh from your neck down to your waist, and then hang them down and tie them to your ankles and make you run so you trip over your own gizzards. See what else there is. Okay, one more. The pivoting pin. They lie you down on your side and drive a stake through one ear, out the other, into the ground, and then grab you by the feet and run round and round. So they had all these various colorful ways of teaching the wrongdoers a lesson. Won't try that again. And that's all comes from sensual pleasures, because they rob and steal to gratify their sensual desires. Again, with sensual pleasures as the cause, sensual pleasures as the source, sensual pleasure as the basis, people indulge in misconduct of body, speech, and mind. Having done so, on the dissolution of the body after death, they reappear in states of deprivation, in an unhappy destiny, in perdition, even in hell. Now this too is a danger in the case of sensual pleasures, a mass of suffering in the life to come. Having sensual pleasure as its cause, sensual pleasure as its source, sensual pleasure as its basis, the cause being simply sensual pleasure. So that's all the various dangers, all the way to rebirth in Naraya, Vichi. And what, bhikkhus, is the escape in the case of sensual pleasures? It is the removal of desire and lust, the abandonment of desire and lust for sensual pleasure. This is the escape in the case of sensual pleasure. So this is, after all the long section on dangers, that's the whole paragraph on the escape. The escape is simply just don't do it. Abandon sensual desire and you avoid all these dangers. That these recluses and Brahmins who do not understand as it actually is, the gratification as gratification, the danger as danger, the escape as escape in the case of sensual pleasures, that they can either themselves fully understand sensual pleasures or instruct another so that he can fully understand sensual pleasure, that is impossible. That those recluses and Brahmins who understand as it actually is, the gratification as gratification, the danger as danger, and the escape as escape, in the case of sensual pleasures, can either themselves fully understand sensual pleasures or instruct another so that he can fully understand sensual pleasure. That is possible. Material form. That was the second section. Remember, it was sensual desire, material form, and feeling. Material form. And what, bhikkhus, is gratification in the case of material form? Suppose there were a girl of the noble class or the Brahmin class or of householder stock, in her 15th or 16th year, neither too tall nor too short, neither too thin nor too fat, neither too dark nor too fair. Is her beauty and loveliness then at its height? Yes, venerable sir. Now the pleasure and joy that arises in dependence on that beauty and loveliness are the gratification in the case of material form. So after the 15th or 16th year, it's all downhill. And that's actually a year younger than you would think, because they count age from conception. So it's 14 or 15-year-old. That was their ideal of female beauty. And what, bhikkhus, is the danger in the case of material form? Later on, one might see that same woman here at 80, 90, or 100 years, aged, as crooked as a roof bracket, doubled up, supported by a walking stick, tottering, frail, youth gone, teeth broken, gray-haired, scanty-haired, bald, wrinkled, with limbs all blotchy. What do you think, bhikkhus? Has her former beauty and loveliness vanished and the danger become evident? Yes, venerable sir. Bhikkhus, this is danger in the case of material form. So the meaning is that material form is pleasant, but it's impermanent. It's evanescent. Any form of beauty, like a flower, a rose, it so blooms and then fades very quickly. Again, one might see the same woman, afflicted, suffering, gravely ill, lying fouled in her own excrement and urine, lifted up by some and set down by others. What do you think, bhikkhus? Has her former beauty and loveliness vanished and the danger become evident? Yes, venerable sirs. Bhikkhus, this too is a danger in the case of material form. Again, one might see that same woman as a corpse, thrown aside in the charnel ground, 1, 2, or 3 days dead, bloated, livid, oozing matter. What do you think, bhikkhus? Has her former beauty and loveliness vanished and the danger become evident? Yes, Venerable Sir, because this too is a danger in the case of material form. Again, one might see that same woman as a corpse thrown aside in the charnel ground, being devoured by crows, hawks, vultures, dogs, jackals, or various kinds of worms. A skeleton with flesh and blood, held together by the sinews. A fleshless skeleton smeared with blood, held together with sinews. Disconnected bones scattered in all directions. Here a hand bone, there a foot bone, here a thigh bone, there a rib bone, here a hip bone, there a backbone, here the skull. Bones bleached white, the color of shells. Bones heaped up, more than a year old. Bones rotted and crumbled to dust. What do you think, bhikkhus? Has former beauty and loveliness vanished and the danger become evident? Yes, Venerable Sir, bhikkhus, this too is a danger in the case of material form. This last paragraph with the various stages of decay is the same list is found in the Satipatthana Sutta as one of the meditations on the body, to contemplate the dissolution of a corpse. In ancient India, they had charnel grounds where the bodies were thrown out. They weren't buried. The bodies of the poor were just taken there and they do a little ceremony and then leave it out on the ground. And the monks and other religious practitioners would come out to that site and contemplate the corpses. And you could find corpses in different stages of decay. Yeah. That's not really possible in the modern world. In Thailand, occasionally they do corpse meditation, and that if someone dies suddenly, particularly if they die by violence, they're murdered, then the people believe that not to cremate the body, because then the ghost will be confused. If they die suddenly, then they may not know they're dead, and the ghost will wander a long time. But if the body's buried or left out, then they'll find it and they'll know they're dead. So sometimes they donate the bodies to monasteries. A few monasteries will accept the bodies and they lay them out in the forest in an open coffin, and the monks can go and take turns contemplating the corpse. In the absence of an actual solid object, a real corpse, you can do this meditation just as a visualization. And one way to do it is to visualize your own body. You're watching your own body decay. If you follow it through the progression of stages, it begins actually very kind of alarming and violent, even with the bloated corpse and the dogs and jackals tearing it apart. And it becomes gradually more peaceful until you have just like bones bleaching in the sun and then turning to dust, and then the wind scatters the dust and there's nothing left. And what, bhikkhus, is the escape in the case of material form? It is the removal of desire and lust, the abandonment of desire for material form. This is the escape in the case of material form. That those recluses and Brahmins who do not understand as it actually is, gratification is gratification, danger is danger, escape is escape in the case of material form, can either themselves fully understand material form or instruct another so that he can fully understand material form, that is impossible. That those recluses and Brahmins who understand as it actually is, the gratification is gratification, the danger is danger, and the escape is escape in the case of material form, can either themselves fully understand material form or instruct another so that he can fully understand material form. That is possible. The last section, fairly brief, is feelings. And what, bhikkhus, is the gratification in the case of feelings? Feelings is Vedana, of course. Here, bhikkhus, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, a bhikkhu enters upon and abides in the first jhana, which is accompanied by applied and sustained thought, with rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. On such an occasion, he does not choose for his own affliction, or for another's affliction, or for the affliction of both. On that occasion, he feels only feeling that is free from affliction. The highest gratification in the case of feelings is freedom from affliction, I say. So it changes tack here. And in terms of feeling, the highest gratification of feeling, the most sublime gratification of feeling, is that found through the jhanas, not through sensual pleasure. And this was brought out in another sutta where the Buddha encounters one of the Naganthas, the naked ascetics who practiced various forms of self-torture. And this fellow was practicing never sitting down or lying down, only standing. And there's still some in India who do that, I've heard, standing practice. And it's really torturous after a period of time. And even it said that even to sleep, what he would do is, because he had long matted hair, he never cut his hair. He would tie his hair in a branch of a tree and hang from it so he wouldn't fall over. And he got into a dispute with the Buddha, and the Buddha, you get the impression in the sutta, the Buddha is kind of making fun of the fellow's ridiculous ideas of finding liberation through this extreme kind of practice. And the Buddha was talking about benefit of jhana, and this ascetic says, so what you're saying is that pleasure comes from pleasure. Well, I say pleasure comes from pain. If pleasure came from pleasure, then King Bimbisara would be an arahant. King Bimbisara, the king of Magadha, is, it's kind of a proverb for the wealthy, sensually indulgent monarch, surrounded by all kind of wealth and luxuries and dancing girls and musicians and everything you can imagine. So he says, if he would be liberated many times over if pleasure came from pleasure. And the Buddha said, can King Bimbisara sit for 9 days without moving, wrapped in the highest bliss? Because I can do that. And he goes into a deep jhana and he just is gone for 9 days. And it said here, this formula for the jhanas is a little different than the one most people are familiar with in terms of the various factors. They're kind of mentioned here, but this is actually more common in the suttas. The formula for first jhana is quite secluded from sense pleasure, secluded from unwholesome states. Then further on it says, with the rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. Vivajata, born of seclusion. The pleasure and bliss comes from seclusion. The movement through the 4 jhanas can be seen as an increasing subtilization and simplification of the mind. The removal and seclusion of the mind from complication and from various distracting factors, the mind settles into a more natural, a more primordial state of being. And the form of consciousness that is the ordinary, daily life consciousness of human beings, is sensual desire level consciousness, is very complex and variegated. And it's full of ups and downs and highs and lows, but it's at a relatively diffuse level of consciousness. And if one is secluded from that, and entering into first jhana is like a phase shift, a quantum shift in consciousness to a second level, the realm of form, the rupa loka. And it's secluded from sense desire. And it's increasingly, as you move through the jhanas, the senses become increasingly far away and are absent altogether in the end. You're secluding the mind from the senses. So in order to enter into jhana, it's a very important prerequisite is sense restraint. And this is one reason why on retreat, this is the primary reason why people on retreat should keep the 8 precepts very strictly, because the 8 precepts formalize elements of sense restraint. They close off avenues where you can amuse yourself and divert yourself through the senses. And it doesn't have to be, when you talk about restraint of the senses in terms of developing jhana, it doesn't have to be gross, extreme sensuality. It's just the whole idea of going out through the senses for diversion, amusement, information. So even, looking at flowers, listening to the birds, this is going out through the senses. It's a harmless activity, but it's not allowing the mind to settle inwardly into the jhana state. There's the story of in the Sudhimagga of the monk who every day he would take a bath in the lotus pool, and one day he bent over to smell a lotus that had just blossomed, and he heard a little voice from the shore, "Thief, thief!" And he said, "I'm not a thief. I've never stolen anything in my life." And the voice says, "It's a little forest dewa," and the forest dewa says, "You're a thief of smells. You're an odor thief." So this goes on through the other jhanas. Again, with the stilling of applied and sustained thought, this vitaka vichara, a bhikkhu enters and abides in the second jhana. With the fading away as well of rapture, piti, he enters and abides in third jhana. With the abandonment of pleasure and pain, he enters and abides in fourth jhana. On such an occasion, he does not choose for his own affliction or others' affliction or the affliction of both. On that occasion, he feels only feeling that is free from affliction. This is the highest gratification in the case of feeling, is freedom from affliction, I say. Vedana is at its most sublime expression in fourth jhana, the upekkha of fourth jhana, which is poetically called the bliss beyond bliss, sukha param sukha, is the highest expression of Vedana. And his freedom from affliction is sometimes the jhana is also referred to as that pleasure which is divorced from the senses and utterly blameless. So you're not doing any harm to self or others or both. And what, bhikkhus, is the danger in the case of feelings? Feelings are impermanent, suffering, and subject to change. This is the danger in the case of feelings. So the Buddha in this sutta had particularly emphasized feelings in terms of the jhanas, but this applies to any feelings, but also, especially, it applies to the jhanas. Even the jhanas are, in the end, sankhara. They are impermanent. They're dependently arisen. They're not to be relied on. Even if you're master of jhana and get reborn in the Brahma realms and live for hundreds of kappas, eventually the time runs out. And that's impermanent on a whole nother scale, but still impermanent. It's still manifest existence. Its consciousness has shifted into another level, which is more sublime, more refined, simpler, closer to the primordial natural state, but it's still conditioned, it's still dependently arisen, and ultimately unsatisfying, unsatisfactory. And it's said that jhana has the taste of nibbana. So it's a way of thinking about it is that you're shedding layers of complication, so you're coming back to a simpler, more unmanifest, and more primordial state. But it's only the mind that's realized nibbana that's completely liberated. And what, bhikkhus, is the escape in the case of feelings? It is the removal of desire and lust, the abandonment of desire and lust for feeling. This is the escape in the case of feelings. And all desire is ultimately for feelings. There's a multitude of things in this world that we desire, but whatever specific object you're thinking that you desire, if you analyze, why do I want this? It's because in the end you think it'll make you happy. It'll give you the happy feeling. And that's the happy feeling is what we ultimately desire. So there is a possibility of desire for Rupa Loka, desire for jhana states, or desire for rebirth in the Brahma realm, which is a subtler, more refined kind of desire than desire for sensual pleasure, but it's still a desire for feeling in the end. And you can see how one might take the rebirth in the Brahma realms as desirable, to be have a consciousness continually in that purified state, and to be transcended from all the kind of stinky, squishy biological stuff of this level is, is kind of an appealing idea. Then those recluses and Brahmins who do not understand as it actually is, the gratification is gratification, the danger is danger, escape is escape, in the case of feelings, can either themselves fully understand feelings or instruct another. That is impossible. Those recluses and Brahmins who do understand as it actually is, the gratification is gratification, danger is danger, escape and escape, in the case of feelings, they can fully understand or instruct another so that he can fully understand feeling, that is possible. This is what the Blessed One said. The bhikkhus were satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. So this sutta has the structure dealing with three factors: sensual desire, material form, and feelings. And in each case, the Buddha analyzes it in terms of gratification, danger, and escape. And there's other incidents where he uses that structure to analyze things, gratification, danger, and escape. To fully understand something like sensual desire or material form or feeling, you have to consider it from all those angles. There is a gratification, there is a, as the PED puts it, there's enjoyment, satisfaction, or sweetness involved in sensual pleasures, material form, and feeling. You do get something out of it. You use a happy feeling, sukha vedana. And the same with material form, and the same with feelings itself. But in all cases, there's danger associated as well. There's a cost to pay. Nothing comes for free. And there's always a downside to everything. And the downside is ultimately entrapment in the material level in the lowest level of consciousness, in sensual desire realm consciousness. And even with feeling, one can transcend that and experience the second level, form level consciousness, but even that is ultimately conditioned and impermanent and not completely satisfying. So the escape is, as in the formula of the Four Noble Truths, the escape is to abandon the desire, to stop wanting it, and then you're free of it.